Open your fridge, then look at the receipt, still folded in your pocket. The lettuce is smaller, the tomatoes taste like wet cardboard. And somehow, the total is higher again. Then step outside after 1 week of heat, one hard rain, or one late frost. And look at the garden bed that was supposed to save you money. The tomato leaves are curled, the soil has baked into a crust, water runs off the top instead of sinking in. You did what you were told, you bought the seedlings, you hauled the bags of mix, you watered on schedule, and still, the whole thing feels fragile, expensive, and weirdly disappointing. That feeling matters, because it is usually framed as a personal failure. You picked the wrong variety, you planted too early, you forgot to fertilize, you need better tools, better timing, better technique. But that is the first lie. You can see the symptoms everywhere, once you stop blaming yourself. In cities, it looks like empty shelves after one supply shock, and peppers priced like luxury items. In the suburbs, it looks like people building raised beds with hope in March, and pulling out dead plants in July. In the countryside, it looks like farmers producing more and owning less, burning more fuel to earn thinner margins. That didn't happen by accident. Over the last century, the logic of food quietly changed. Not how to keep land fertile, not how to keep families fed, not how to make a small piece of ground resilient. The new question became, how do we move more volume with less labor, across greater distances, with more machinery, more standardization, and more purchased inputs? So now, the average person inherits the bill for a system they never chose. You pay for it at the store when basic produce suddenly costs double. You pay for it in the garden when 1 week of neglect kills plants that should have been buffered by healthy soil. And this is why an old story from the edge of Paris matters. It matters right now, more than ever, because there was a time when ordinary people faced a harder version of our problem and solved it from the ground up. No refrigerated trucks, no global supply chain, no easy chemical rescue. The shocking part is not just how much they grew, it is what their success reveals about our failure. These growers were not standing on magical land. They weren't backed by giant machines, cheap fuel, or endless irrigation. They worked on small plots, close to the city, under cold skies, with ordinary tools. And yet the land produced with a steadiness that feels almost impossible to modern ears. That contrast should bother you, because if people on tiny parcels over a century ago could keep cities supplied, why do so many modern gardens fail after one rough season? Why are so many farmers trapped on a treadmill, where they must buy more every year just to maintain output? Why does our food system look enormous and powerful from a distance, yet feel so vulnerable up close? Those are not random failures. You can feel that exhaustion in the physical details. Soil that should smell sweet and fungal now smells flat and mineral. Beds that should absorb rain puddle and crack. Plants that should resist stress collapse the moment the forecast turns erratic. A harvest that should come in waves arrives all at once or not at all. Meanwhile, every solution sold back to you comes in a bag, a bottle, or a gadget, or a financing plan. But if the foundation is wrong, effort just gets converted into frustration. You can work harder and still lose. You can spend more and still be standing in front of a wilted bed, wondering why growing a salad feels like managing a crisis. That is the real trap. So before we talk about yields, methods, or old market gardens, we have to name the thing most people are actually up against. Not laziness, not ignorance, but a food system that depletes the very conditions that make food stable in the first place. Once you see that, your dead tomato plant stops being an embarrassment. It becomes evidence. Your expensive grocery run becomes evidence. The hard pan in your yard becomes evidence. Here is the part almost nobody says out loud. Your disappointing harvest is not proof that you're bad at growing food. It is often proof that you followed instructions written by an industry that profits when your soil stays weak. The bag of synthetic fertilizer, the seasonal tilling, the herbicide pass, the glossy palette of raised bed mix, the promise that you can fix dead ground by pouring in a product and starting over each spring. This is sold as modern efficiency. But look closely at what it actually does. Think about the ritual most people were taught. First, break the ground open, chop, turn, pulverize. Then feed the crop with soluble nutrients, because the soil can no longer feed itself. Then spray or pull weeds, because disturbed soil wakes up every dormant seed bank at once. Then water more, because exposed broken ground dries faster. Then buy more amendments, because yields slip and the plants look tired. And the strangest part is that many gardeners blame themselves, while this cycle quietly empties their pockets. You buy seedlings, you buy compost in plastic bags, you buy a tiller or rent one for the weekend. You buy tomato feed, calcium spray, slug bait, mulch, hoses. Replacement hoses. Premium potting soil that turns hydrophobic by July. Then August arrives, and the lettuce bolts, the cucumbers, mildew. The carrots fork in hard ground, and you stand there with dirt under your nails, feeling like you failed some basic human test. Because soil is not an inert brown medium, it is infrastructure. It is a negotiated peace between roots, fungi, bacteria, insects, moisture, pore space, minerals, and time. The minute you treat it like a dead sponge to be forced into production, the entire biology starts collapsing. Tilling does not just loosen earth. It tears apart fungal strands that were moving minerals and water across the bed. It exposes protected organic matter to a sudden burst of oxidation. It destroys the crumb structure that keeps air and moisture in balance. That is why beds get harder the more effort you put into them. You step into weed, and the footprint seals the surface. You till again to fix that, which breaks the soil aggregates again. You add chemical fertilizer to push growth, giving the plant a sugar high. But it does nothing to rebuild the underground workforce. A fast green flush appears, and people call it success. But the plant is now growing in a bodyguardless environment, less able to regulate pests, less buffered against drought, less connected to the mycorrhizal web that would have traded nutrients in exchange for root exudates. Herbicides deepen the trap, marketed as labor-saving tools, but the hidden cost is biological amnesia. Bare, sterile ground is not healthy ground. Weeds are often the symptom of disturbance, not the original crime. When you repeatedly kill surface growth, instead of changing the conditions, you lock yourself into annual warfare. The soil loses cover, temperatures spike, microbial life swings between feast and famine, and moisture disappears into the air. Even the language is a con. Feed your plants, they say, as if the plant were an isolated machine and not one participant in a living exchange. Real fertility does not arrive as blue crystals or neon liquid from a jug. Real fertility is generated, held, shared, and defended by life in the soil. Fungi extend the reach of roots. Bacteria cycle nutrients into plant-available forms. Organic matter acts like a savings account. Undisturbed structure stores both air and water in the same handful. When that network is intact, the soil has something close to an immune system. This is why people can grow a beautiful crop once in a brand new bed, and then spend the next 3 seasons trying to recover that first-year magic. The initial fertility pulse gets mistaken for a repeatable strategy. But under the hood, the system is eating itself. The microbes burn through exposed carbon, the fungal web gets severed, nutrients leach, the bed crusts. Pests arrive like opportunists, circling an exhausted host. And yet history leaves a very uncomfortable clue. The highest-yielding small growers in the old market garden systems were not winning by overpowering nature with more chemistry or bigger equipment. They were winning because they refused to break the soil engine they depended on. They understood something we forgot. Every unnecessary disturbance is a tax on future harvests. Every intact inch of living structure is stored labor. So, if you've been feeling like food is getting more expensive, gardens are getting harder, and every season demands more money for less certainty, that frustration has a target. Not your effort, not your intelligence, the model itself, the machine that sells damage, then sells the treatment, then calls your dependence progress. What they had was not magic, and it was not better dirt. It was a working, biological engine. Picture a deep bed built from composting manure, straw, leaves, kitchen scraps, anything once alive. Down in the center, microbes begin eating. As they feed, they release heat, not metaphorical heat, real heat. A well-built pile can run hot enough to steam in cold air. Now put a layer of soil above that warmth. Then cover the crop with old glass. This is one of the lost rules of food growing. The field is never just the weather report. Every garden contains smaller climates inside it. The south side of a stone wall stores heat all day and leaks it back at night. A thick mulch layer slows evaporation and keeps the soil from swinging wildly between wet and dry. A hedge cuts wind, which means leaves lose less water, which means roots do not have to panic and shut down. A cold frame traps low winter sun like a parked car warming through the windshield. None of that is mystical. You can feel it with your hand. Step from bare exposed ground onto mulched soil in summer, and the temperature shift is immediate. Put your fingers under a decomposing compost layer on a cold morning, and it is warm. And the real secret goes one layer deeper, below what you can see. Healthy soil is not a brown substance. It is a city. Bacteria bloom, first, on fresh organic matter. Fungi stretch through pore spaces like white threads, sewing loose particles together. Protozoa graze on bacteria. Nematodes move through water films. Earthworms drag surface material downward and leave behind castings that hold nutrients in plant-available forms. Plant roots are not sitting in dirt like straws in a cup. They are negotiating with an entire underground economy. If you've ever wondered why one bed grows plants that look glossy and upright, while another bed grows the same variety with yellow edges and sulking leaves, this is usually the difference. In the first bed, the soil food web is active. Water infiltrates instead of running off. Organic matter holds moisture like a sponge. Fungal strands move nutrients across distances too small for us to notice, and too important for plants to ignore. In the second bed, the ground may still contain nutrients on a lab test, but the delivery system is damaged. Tilling shreds fungal networks. Bare soil bakes. That is why those old growers could push crops earlier and harder on small plots, without collapsing the ground beneath them. They weren't mining the soil. They were feeding the organisms that made the soil behave like infrastructure. Compost was not just fertilizer. It was habitat, sponge, pantry, insulation, and inoculation all at once. It fed microbes, darkened the soil so it absorbed sunlight, increased crumb structure so roots could penetrate, and held enough moisture that a dry week didn't become a crop emergency. The bed itself became an ally. Once that clicks, a lot of modern advice starts to look upside down. You can even see the principle in a pile of rotting wood. In a forest, fallen logs act like slow batteries. They soak rain, hold moisture through dry spells, and feed fungi for years. Buried wood in a mound does something similar. Not as a trend, not as a costume version of nature, but as a moisture bank and long-term carbon reservoir. That same logic shows up in brush windbreaks, leaf mulch, compost paths, low tunnels, even the spacing of crops. And that changes the emotional experience of growing food, too. Instead of reacting all season, water because it dried out, spray because something attacked, fertilize because leaves went pale, you begin designing conditions that make those emergencies less likely. The plants are not tougher because you bought some miracle product. They are tougher because their roots are plugged into a functioning network, in a place where temperature, moisture, and biology stay more stable. That stability is where resilience comes from, not from heroics. When someone says a small plot can't compete, they're usually wrong. They mean it can't compete if it acts like an industrial field. But a hand-tended space with active compost plays a different game. It is using forgotten code, and once you see it, everything changes. Stop asking how to overpower nature and start asking better questions. What happens when you let biology do the expensive work for you? Most people get this backwards, thinking the breakthrough is more effort. They want deeper digging, more inputs, and more expensive gear. Real leverage begins when you stop treating soil like a dead medium. Give it one simple job. Just keep the ground covered. That can be as crude as flattened cardboard with compost on top. No tiller, no flipping, no expensive raised bed kits on a pallet. Just plain brown boxes, soaked through and laid over the weeds. Overlap them so light cannot get in, then cover with waste. Use leaves, compost, old straw, or even half-finished garden scraps. You can watch the difference with your body before using tools. Walk out to bare soil in midsummer and kneel down. Your shins hit heat, and the surface is crusted like pottery. Every watering feels like pouring money into a cracked bucket. Then kneel next to a bed covered in leaves or compost. The air is cooler at ground level, and the soil is damp. It is not wet in a swampy way. It is just stable. The most powerful move in a garden is embarrassingly cheap. Stop cleaning it so aggressively and leave the chopped stems. Pile the fall leaves instead of bagging them for the curb. Bury kitchen scraps where next season's heavy feeders will grow. If you have old sticks or rotten firewood, sink them below. Let them become a slow battery of moisture and carbon. People hear this and think neglect, but it is not neglect. The less neat method often creates the more controlled result. Cardboard suppresses the annual weeds without using any herbicide. Wood, buried under a mound, holds water like a giant wick. A thick skin of leaves softens the force of the rain. That means less compaction, which means more oxygen for the roots. Roots go deeper, the crop tolerates heat, and you irrigate less. One small intervention cascades into 5 fewer problems. That is leverage. If your site is poor, this matters even more. Maybe you have hardpan, builder's rubble, or sand that dries fast. Fine. Start where the system gives you an opening. The soggy edge can become a willow and comfrey moisture bank. The hot south wall can become your earliest greens bed. The leaves your neighbors discard can become next year's fertility. That was the genius. In the old systems, people romanticize. They were not built on unlimited labor or expensive machines. They were built on actions that multiplied the work of biology. Put organic matter on top, and millions of organisms drag it down. Shade the ground, and the bed waters itself much longer. Feed fungi, and they extend the root system for the plant. Create one protected microclimate, and your season stretches for free. If you think you need to double dig everything, don't get stuck. Take the smallest patch you can manage. Just one bed, one strip along a fence, or where the lawn won't thrive. Cover it, feed it from the top, and let decomposition work. Then watch what changes first, like the number of weeds pulled. Picture the moment the system stutters and the trucks are late. Shelves thin out in hours, and lettuce costs what meat used to. People stand under fluorescent lights, doing panic math with a cart. They put food back one item at a time as prices climb. That is what dependence looks like, and it is a grim scene. Now set beside it a different scene. You walk outside. You go to a cool basement shelf. With a simple basket, you pull out what your household will eat for dinner tonight. Potatoes cured months ago, and garlic braided and hanging. Jars of tomatoes catching the last of the summer sun. That difference is bigger than savings, and bigger than yield. It is the difference between renting survival and holding it yourself. We were trained to think of growing food as a hobby, something decorative you do after the real economy is finished. But the old gardeners understood the truth more clearly. A productive plot is not a side activity, it is a buffer. It is a shield against price shocks and the deepest food security. Security is not a full pantry, bought in one anxious weekend. It is the ability to make food again, season after season. It is knowing which bed dries first and which corner warms early, knowing where the compost finishes fastest and how onions cure. That is not theory, it is sovereignty built through repetition. The first year may not look dramatic from the road. A few beds, some mistakes, and maybe too many radishes. Industrial food made sure we forgot methods like this. A family that produces its own food does not panic. It does not absorb every price increase without some resistance. It does not need every solution sold in a plastic bag. Independence is bad for any system that profits from dependence. The first year may not look dramatic from the road. The real threat of a garden is not a single tomato. It is that it changes the relationship between a person and necessity. This does not require a fantasy homestead or a bank loan. Small ground, carefully managed, can carry far more than expected. Not because of heroics, but because of density and biology. Soil, once restored, starts doing the heavy lifting for you. Local food, harvested at its peak, does not fade or travel. A square foot does astonishing things when treated as habitat. When we say grow food, this is the level we mean. Not as content, not as aesthetics, and not for social media. It is a contract with the future and a refusal to be cornered. A promise that when disruption comes, you have a system that answers to sunlight, compost, and your own labor. There is dignity in that which cannot be bought at checkout. This matters so much more than simple gardening advice. In an age of brittle supply chains, a garden is political. Your household will not be a consumer unit waiting for permission. The land under your care is not just ornamental. That is the image to hold on to, not some perfect fantasy. The next time the headlines turn sharp, someone will be racing. Somebody will be racing toward a store in a panic, but you will be walking toward a garden bed or cellar.